When you have a consultative sales process, like you sell IT services, something like that, where you've got multiple steps and the process can require multiple meetings, sharing a lot of information, there's a huge difference between the person that can go through that process and share the information and leave you with a bunch of deals that are stuck in the CRM and follow up because they can't close a deal, and somebody that can get the deal done. And there are some things that you can do in the interview process to make sure that you are hiring somebody that's going to help you make more money instead of making more friends. Let's dive in. Hey, what's up? I'm Ray Green, former executive turned nomad entrepreneur. And in my sales executive life, the teams that I built sold more than $250 million. I've turned around 8 sales teams, and I've hired hundreds of closers. Now, scratch that. I've hired hundreds of salespeople, and some of them were closers. And over time, I figured out some very strategic ways to make sure that I was actually getting a closer and not somebody that was trying to build their network, build relationships, share information, but not get deals across the finish line. And what I'm going to do today is share 6 of those to help you make sure that your next sales hire makes you money. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do in a sales interview, if I'm looking for a closer, right? Like I've got a consultative sales process, I want to make sure that the person I'm hiring isn't going to waste the next 6 months building up all these deals that aren't ever going to actually be won or lost, right? Like just not even get them to the finish line. The first thing I'm going to do is look at the resume that they sent me, right? Like this is the best case that they are making for the most important product that they will ever sell in their life themselves. So I'm going to take a look at that. Now, I will tell you this up front, I think most resumes are bullshit. Everybody inflates some degree or exaggerates or highlights, something that everybody really did and they took credit for. So like right out of the gates, I'll just tell you, I think most things on a resume are bullshit, but they are very telling because the person that wrote them is going to tell you how they think when they write that resume, even if they're embellishing the results just a little bit. But I mean, nobody does that, right? When I look at that resume, is it filled with words or is it filled with numbers? Is it measurable, tangible results? Am I seeing dollar signs and percent signs? Or am I seeing a lot of great copywriting in a wall of text? And what it tells you is the person that wrote it doesn't think in terms of results. And what do you want from your closer? You want results and you want numbers. The second thing that I'm looking for is that in these numbers, am I seeing things that are relative? Am I seeing things that are stack ranked? Am I seeing a total sales number without any context, right? Sold $1.5 million over at so-and-so. All right, what's that tell me? You might have been the worst performer in that company at that number. Okay, so I want to see numbers, I want to see percents, and I want to see the language that they're using. I promise you this, a top producer will tell you that they were a top producer. They will tell you ranked first in such and such, ranked second in the nation, went to President's Club 8 times running. Like they will tell you that if they're good at sales, right? The third thing that I'm going to look at is what they sold. There's a big difference between selling transactional $300 things that are one call closes with a 15-minute presentation and 4-stage sales cycles that require multiple decision makers and a long process and sharing a lot of information, relevant information, and closing a deal. Okay, very different sales processes. And if I want to hire a closer, if I want to increase the probability that I'm going to hire a closer, they're going to have to show me that they've done this successfully somewhere else. That's the next thing I'm going to do is with this resume, when I'm actually talking to them, I'm going to tell them straight up. I'm going to say, listen, I've got a lot of these here. And a lot of people say they sell a lot of things. How can you, Mr. and Mrs. Salesperson, prove to me that these numbers are good and that they're real? Like, how can you prove your past results to me? Help me make that decision. Now, what I've done when I do that is I've turned myself into a buyer, an interested buyer, right? I'm saying, hey, hand raiser, I have some intent here. I'm saying, prove this to me, Mr. and Mrs. Salesperson, that these past results are good and that they're real. And if they're offended by that, they're going to be offended in your sales process. But a top producer, somebody that is a closer and knows they're a closer, they're going to get creative with it. They're going to figure out how to prove it to you. They are going to give you references. They are going to give you names. They are going to give you reports. They are going to say, give me a minute and let me figure it out, because that's what a closer does. He or she is talking to an interested party and buying their stuff, which is them. And I'm saying, prove this to me. That's going to show you what they're going to do in your sales process. The second thing I'm going to do is when we have this conversation, after I've looked at the resume, I'm going to say, tell me about your favorite or your least favorite selling methodology. I'm sure you've gone through some sales training, Sandler, Spin, Challenger, like there's a lot of methodologies out there. Which one is your favorite or your least favorite and why? There's actually no right answer here. Like, this is like, yeah, tell me your favorite diet. Like, most of them work. Okay. If you work them and you execute the right way. But what this is going to do is going to tell me how they think. They're going to start explaining to me how they think and what they believe about that particular methodology. And I'm going to be listening for code words, right? I'm going to be listening for things like, oh, I didn't want to be pushy, or I didn't like that one because it was a hard closing type of thing and, felt aggressive. And you'll be shocked at how many people will start telling you that they're not a closer if you give them an opportunity. Now, don't make a mistake here and think they have to be aggressive and they have to be a hard closer and they have to be annoying and they have to be pushy to sell. Good closers are not using language like, I didn't want to be annoying. Oh, it felt a little pushy. Oh, that's not how they think. Like, they're trying to get results. They're trying to get a W at the end of the game, period. The other thing that I'm doing when I ask this question is I'm just basically testing how professional of a salesperson are you? Because if you haven't read any books, if you haven't done any training, if you haven't done any courses, if you can't tell me about selling methodology, I don't need you to subscribe to all of them, but I need to know that you are a professional and you take the craft and the trade seriously enough to be doing some recon, to be learning, to be getting best practices, to be understanding how can I sell more stuff and how can I make more money. The third thing I'm going to do when I'm talking to them is I'm going to ask them to do some scenario testing. So for example, I'll say, hey, in your last role over at such and such, what were the top objections that you got? What were the top reasons people didn't buy? And, they'll say something like, oh, budget, always a big one, budget and price. They're going to say, had to think about it, had to talk to partners, like whatever they were. Like, they'll list off the top 3 or 5. Let them list off the top 3 or 5, pick one, maybe even pick the first one, because that's probably the most common one, and say, oh, okay. If I said right now, like, oh, you know what? We don't have budget for that right now. Well, how would you handle that? And if they don't come out of the gates ready, if they don't know that what to say at that point, then they are not a closer. They are not prepared. They just told you what the top objection was in their last company. If they don't know how to handle that, they're not going to close deals because they've already been there. They already know that that's the thing they should have practiced for, should have trained for, and should know how to answer more than any other thing. So that's one. Another may be, hey, tell me the most creative thing that you've had to do to get a deal unstuck, or if you had a stalled deal. Tell me about a deal that you was having trouble moving forward. What was the most creative thing that you've done to get one of those deals unstuck? They should, if they're a closer, be able to tell you multiple scenarios where they've had deals that were stuck and things that they proactively did to make that happen. Great salespeople are creative. They are problem solvers. They are reading the room and they are developing the solutions that they need to strategically move a deal across the line. So that's another one. Another one may be, tell me about a time in your career where your pipeline was lean and maybe you were being fed deals that weren't really qualified. What was the scenario with that? And what did you do to increase pipeline or work with those leads that you were getting that were unqualified? And here, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for somebody that said, yeah, I would love deals that ball on the tee and I just have to come in and knock the cover off the ball. But I've had a couple times where my pipeline was low and I took ownership. I proactively went out and I canvassed. I started picking up the phone. I took any deal that was even remotely qualified, because if there aren't any other opportunities, even if it's not high intent, if it's at least remotely qualified, I'd rather work with that than not work with anything at all. I can't tell you how many salespeople, consultative salespeople, will sit with an empty pipeline or complain about less than qualified leads and won't get their ass out there and actually take ownership and start doing what they need to do to get more sales. You may have great marketing machine. You may have everything that you need in that rep, and that closer may not need to do a lot of prospecting. That's not even what I care about. I care about the mindset. I care about the ownership mentality that says, if I have an empty pipeline, I'm going to do something about it, right? I'm not going to sit in my chair and just sit back and wait and complain about marketing. And then you can also ask some questions about hey, what's your take on, right? So for example, you may say, say you are early in the deal process and, at the discovery call, you find out the decision maker is not going to be there and he's sent somebody else, he delegated it out to somebody. What's your opinion of that? How do you handle that? Just think through what the scenarios are in your deals that come up routinely. Ask them how they're going to respond, right? And in that example, again, not a right answer and not a wrong answer necessarily. I've met some closers that say, if decision maker's not showing, I'm not showing. I'm going to challenge them and I'm going to do X, Y, Z in order to make sure that decision maker shows up. right? Like I don't want to lower my status to do that. I've also heard closers say, I'm going to do what I can, but if I can't, I'm going to keep my foot in the door. I'm going to keep that conversation going. And there are scenarios where either one of those could potentially be right. I'd have to see your sales process and your metrics and your demand and all of that to know which one is right and which one is wrong. But again, I want to know how they think. Fourth thing that I do when I'm looking for a closer, I look for competitive tendencies and not just win deals. Like I'm actually looking for other characteristics. Like, does the competitive spirit just live and thrive deep within them? It has universally in every closer that I have ever met, there's an underlying desire to win. They are competitive. And you can often find that out. You can find that out. Did they play sports? Did they play team sports? Did they learn, hey, you got to get the W, but sometimes you got to work with other players? And when they talk or get in their resume, are they talking about being in the top? Are they talking about the highest in sales? Are they talking about awards? Are they talking about achievements? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for just a general sense of competition and somebody that wants to win. When they are driven by a sense of competition and a strong desire to win, complete game changer, because you get more discretionary effort and more energy and more creativity from somebody that just needs to win. The last two are pretty quick here. The first is, do they interview you? Good closers know their value. If I can close deals, I'm basically set, right? Like my kids will never starve because I know how to close deals, which means if I show up to an interview and I understand I've got to prove myself too, and I'm going to do my best to do that. But I also want to make sure, is this an environment I can win in? Right? I'm also going to make sure, is this a product that I actually want to sell? Like I'm going to look at other factors beyond, oh boy, I hope I get this job. I hope I get this job, because I've got options. And I know there's a lot of business owners and a lot of businesses that need that skill set. So I am not going to take anything and everything under the sun. I am going to make sure that I'm getting into an opportunity where I can win, that I can make the money that I want to make, that I'm working with the kind of people that I want to work with, and that I'm selling something that I might actually give a shit about. If they're not asking you questions, if they're not challenging you, that means they don't have options. If they don't have options, that means they can't close shit. Which brings me to my last one, which is, do they close you? Do they interview you? But do they ask for the sale, right? Do they ask what the next steps are? Do they ask where you're at in the process? Do they ask to get the job? That doesn't mean they have to directly say, hey, so am I hired? But that does mean at the end of this, they're going to ask your temperature. Like, so where are you at in this process? They're going to ask specific next steps. Can we lock in those next steps? When are you going to have a decision by? Is there anything that would keep us from moving forward? Is there anything that you heard today that might keep you from hiring me? Right? They are going to ask. Here's the thing. Promise you, the best sales process a closer will ever run is when they are selling the product that is most important. There is no more important product than themselves and putting food on the table and making more money themselves. So if they're not asking for the sale for themselves, they are not going to ask for the sale when they're selling your stuff. I hope this has been helpful. If it has, subscribe to the channel for more on how to get more sales out of your business. Adios.